You are now entering Nick and Mello's hyperspace.
Hello, I'm Carmelo, and my favorite scene, because I was a dancer, is the tribal dance around the bonfire with Boba Fett and the Tusken Raiders. I thought that was awesome.
And my name's Nick, and my favorite scene had to be the final duel between Boba and Cad Bane. I thought that was a nice way to kind of wrap up Boba's arc.
In our journeys through hyperspace, we examine everything and anything Star Wars from the point of view of two lifelong fans, one young, one old, who came together through the will of the Force.
In this episode, we are going to talk about the Book of Boba Fett. If you didn't get that from our intro, spoilers. Spoilers, I guess. But yes, that's what we're going to discuss today.
We're going to be discussing spoilers for half an hour.
Pretty much. So if you haven't watched it, I probably want to watch it first before you come and listen to this. But
absolutely,
I just wanted to start, Carmelo. We talked a little bit about it offline, but what's your general thoughts about the show as a whole?
You know, it's really interesting. I was thinking about this all week, preparing for this episode, for our episode. And it's really interesting how there are lots of moments that I really enjoy. And there were lots of things that I thought were really, really interesting. I think my issue was putting it all together. That as a show, there were all sorts of things that kept pulling me in different directions. But it's really interesting that it's not all of those little moments, all of those things that happened throughout. I really enjoyed those kinds of things. It's when it all adds up, and we'll talk about that in the show. When it all adds up, I felt myself torn in many, many, many ways. And what about you, Nick?
Yeah, I liked it. It wasn't my favorite thing in Star Wars, but it was my least favorite, I guess you could say. It was fun. I enjoyed each Wednesday. Me and my wife made a tradition to wake up early, get breakfast, and watch it. So that's always fun. And I mean, we generally liked all the episodes. There's a small nitpick things that I didn't like or wasn't into, but you know, I think it was a fun way to kind of explore Boba Fett, who for most people has just been a cool action figure or a cool poster for like 40 years. So it's been fun to kind of do something different. I know a lot of people that read the books and comics in the 90s and 2000s, he was very prominent and always doing cool stuff. But for people that just watch the animated series or even the movies, he's just kind of a cool looking character and a little bit of mystery, which always was intriguing to people.
I want to talk about mystery later on in the show.
Yeah, it was a fun show. I don't know if I'm going to revisit it a whole lot. But I like you, it kind of had me curious to what the point of some things were. The first 4 were really solid. I enjoyed them. And then for 2 episodes, it's basically Mando season 3 basically. And Boba Fett had one scene where he didn't even say anything, which I guess is kind of on brand for him. He standing in the background looking cool, but it felt like a whole new show just kind of popped up out of nowhere. And I enjoyed that break, but also kind of wanted to get back to what Boba was doing. Like,
yeah,
I kind of at that point was invested in him,
and that is one of the things that I found odd in the first part of the show. I'm going to call them flashbacks because they ain't dreams. Nobody dreams chronologically, for God's sake.
Right.
The flashbacks to me took me away from the main plot, which is Boba Fett coming to terms with the world that he is now part of. And he's trying to sort of create a space for himself, which to me is fundamentally very, very interesting. We kept going back to the story of how he got to the point when we see him in Mandalorian 2. And then the second half of the show is Mando and how we get from Mando in the end of season 2 of Mandalorian to the point of Boba Fett. And so I had a structural issue that in the first part of the show, the flashback took over. And in the second part of the show, Mando and Grogu took over. It's really interesting, Nick. It feels like the show began in episode 6, when they start sort of saying, okay, we need to protect Tatooine from spice traders, from the syndicate. how are we going to do this? Everything else, it felt like a setup for the second half of episode 6 and all of episode 7, which as a show, I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed. But it was really interesting how there were all of these things that the show felt forced to add. And so the show wouldn't start, and the show wouldn't start, and the show wouldn't start. And so that I found problematic, narratively speaking, as somebody who was trained in film. And there were all these like screenwriting issues in here. You don't call the show The Book of Boba Fett, and Boba has a cameo appearance in his own show in which he doesn't say anything. It's odd. It's just odd. Do I hate it? No. Is it terrible? No. But it's really odd.
I've seen people online talk about like, it's the Book of Boba Fett, and sometimes in a novel, the title character may not be in the chapter, or they may be an interlude for something else. But in a book, there's multiple chapters. It's 300-400 pages. Yeah. This is 7 episodes.
This is 7 episodes.
So it taking 2 out of 7 to focus on somebody else of a show called Book of Boba Fett is odd. Like you said, if it was called Tales of the Bounty Hunters, or there's
Tales
of Mandalorians, something like that.
There's a woman in Salon, which is a really fascinating website, who wrote a review. The review sort of felt like the last episode, but it was a review of the whole show. Mm-hmm. And she has what I think is the perfect title for this book, for the show, The Mandalorian Chronicles. So it's about Boba Fett, who has a Mandalorian armor, and Mando, who has a Mandalorian armor from being a foundling. Mm-hmm. I would have loved that show.
Yeah.
But there's this sort of idea of indulging about Boba Fett fans. Yeah. And so it needed to be called The Book of Boba Fett. But when you look at the whole show, it really is a show about more than just Boba Fett.
Yeah. It ties into the larger Star Wars universe, which is nice. But also the whole show is, like I said, 7 episodes, and it got to the point where even though I enjoyed those 2 episodes, I really wanted to see what Boba's doing, what's going on with that conflict, and I think even before the show premiered, they were kind of talking about it as Mando season 2.5. And that's very odd.
Oh, I had not heard that. Okay.
I heard a few people say that. I think it was Robert Rodriguez said that. Okay. That's what he kind of referred it to. And
interesting.
And I kind of could think about how we're talking about the structure of the show. I kind of really compare it to Solo, the movie, which I enjoy very much. But, in the original trilogy, we heard lines about he won the Falcon, Chewie has a life debt to him. He had the Kessel Run. And these are all kind of things that we knew happened.
Oh, that's interesting.
We knew these things happened. But then seeing it, it's like, did we really need to see it, I guess? Kind of like Boba Fett. We knew he'd get out of the Sarlacc. We saw he had a gaffy stick. We saw how he got his armor, or he was looking for his armor. And they kind of explained every little thing. And it was kind of predictable to me at sometimes. We knew where he ends up. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, but maybe if this came out prior to season 2, it would have been interesting.
If I just thought of this, I have never thought about this. It would have been fun to have a series of little webisodes.
Yeah.
Like little isolated 4-minute, 5-minute little things to sort of give us that information. But in the show, I found it distracting. I kept thinking every time we were back into that Bacta tank, and I'm like, no. Tell me what's happening now.
Yeah.
Don't go back to the past. And even though I enjoyed the whole Tusken Raider scene, I love the train sequence. There were lots of things that I mean, as themselves, I found very interesting, but not in the narrative arc of the show. You said something that I found really interesting, the whole idea of expectations, of talking about, what fans wanted to see. And I think there is a lot of that in this show. We talked about nostalgia in the past. We dedicated a whole episode on nostalgia. And it sort of felt like this show was sort of indulging on whatever happened to Boba Fett, which I just didn't find narratively interesting enough to give us all of that detail.
I personally enjoyed kind of the direction Boba took in his arc. I thought it was pretty satisfying.
I don't mind the characters growing. I think that's really smart. I love how the annoying little Ahsoka from the Clone Wars movie is now a very wise woman in The Mandalorian and in Boba Fett. I think that's wonderful. I think the issue that I have with Boba Fett is that the growing happens when he's with the Tusken Raiders.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted that growing to be articulated a little better, because I do not want to rule by fear. I want to rule by respect, which is a fascinating line. I sort of wanted I wanted the show to tell us how Boba Fett got there. I think it's clear that he understands the importance of community with the notion of the tribe with the Tusken Raiders. Mm-hmm. But I don't know where the notion of respect comes from.
I think that kind of, like you said, the time with the tribe kind of, that's where we really see a lot of his growth. And then in the present, he should just kind of already be, that growth should be finished. But I think there's a little more there, because in that episode the first complaint I really had about the first 3 episodes was, why is Boba all of a sudden wanting to be a crime lord or a daimyo or whatever? I can't remember the term.
Daimyo.
Daimyo, yeah.
It's a Japanese word, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
But to me, it was
which means the Lord. So.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, to me, it was like, why is Boba Fett, what's with the career change? All of a sudden, you've been a bounty hunter for 30, 40 years or whatever, and then all of a sudden you want to be in Jabba's spot, which I enjoyed in that 4th episode, where we kind of see how he finds Fennec and gets his ship back. I kind of enjoyed, they had that conversation by the campfire. Like, I think his time with the Tuskens kind of, in a way, humanized him. And I think this show and Mando have done a really good job of kind of giving us a different look at the Tuskens that we haven't really gotten before.
I agree.
I think that's really cool, and kind of makes me, other scenes with Tuskens kind of looks at them a little differently. But I think with him being with the Tuskens, he had to earn their respect. They ended up trusting him. He learned how to be a leader in that time. And I think even in the present, he was still kind of learning to be a leader, because it's a different situation, much larger scale. And there's a lot of personalities that come involved that he has to manage. And the Tuskens were very unified, and he kind of joined that unit,
right.
That tribe. And then in the present, he's kind of building a new tribe, building his own tribe. He never had to do that before. This is something new to him. Even before the Tuskens, he was a loner, so he had to kind of grow and learn to be a leader. And I think being the daimyo, it, like I said, was new to him, but he didn't want to do what Jabba did. Like he said to Fennec, there's so many jobs that could have been avoided by just having a conversation or, doing something differently. They just kind of wanted us to be mindless.
Yeah. It's really interesting listening to you, because I'm sort of like, oh yeah. But I didn't see that in the show.
Okay. It could just be me.
I sort of felt like the arc that you just described is the appropriate arc for the Boba Fett that we get, who is trying to create a community of like-minded individuals in Tatooine. I get that. I just didn't see that process in the show, to me. And there's been all sorts of talk about online, and I've actually been talking to certain scholars about this as well. We get one more, the sort of white savior, the Boba as the savior of the Tuskens, and he's the one that puts it all together. And it's there, and Disney has no qualms telling those kinds of stories. They've done it a million times. But I wanted to get to that wisdom, and I sort of felt like the show didn't take me there. Once again, that's sort of the way I felt. Can we switch gears?
Sure.
Let's talk about bounty hunting, because it's
Okay.
sort of related to this sort of notion
Yeah.
of he's moving away from the idea of bounty hunting, but he is surrounded by bounty hunters
Right.
in the show, and it's sort of like, you know, he's sort of using what he knows, but Fennec Shand and Chrysanthemum and Mando himself. And so it's really interesting to see the balance of Boba Fett, who has been the ideal bounty hunter in Star Wars, sort of moving away from that, but being surrounded by men and women and non-humans who are part of that bounty hunting world. And I found that interesting. They didn't do much with it, but I found that sort of an interesting element. Because when in the episode that we had about the comics, I said, you know, it's really interesting how bounty hunters are always around, but they never sort of get a lot of sort of leading roles.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was fun. It was fun having that there.
Yeah, we also talked about how they are very, I don't want to say flip-floppy, but very just kind of brush things off. And as we mentioned earlier before we started recording, about how Chrysanthemum just tried to kill him, and then the next episode he's on the team, and I thought that was very kind of funny. But I think Boba kind of, like I said earlier, he has grown from his days as a bounty hunter, and I kind of see he kind of wants to. It'd be kind of like a employee becoming the boss and being like, well, when I was doing this, it didn't work. The boss didn't listen. The boss was, you know, he didn't understand what we had to go through. Right. I kind of took it as that kind of a promotion for him.
Yeah.
But, you know, I do agree. There were things that they didn't really explain very well. It was kind of not always clear, I guess. And as I mentioned in the intro, like I said, my favorite scene was with Cad Bane, the duel they had at the end. I love the way that it was executed, that he had to use the gaffy stick. And it kind of brought it full circle. That's how he beats Bane, with a gaffy stick. Right. And he doesn't necessarily, it would have been very boring to me if it was just a shootout and he shot Cad Bane and that was it. I think the gaffy stick was symbolism of how far he's come. That kind of shows his growth.
Yes.
That was cool. I think that was very poetic in a way that Star Wars tends to be.
And it was really fun having a bounty hunter like Cad Bane, who is still the threatening bounty hunter.
Right.
Because Fennec Shand sort of folds into the world of Boba, Chrysanthemum folds into the world of Boba. And so it's really interesting how Cad sort of remains outside of that world. And it was really fun having that addition to this world in which bounty hunters are sort of becoming a community of leaders for Boba Fett in Tatooine itself. And so I like that as a contrast. And I agree with you, the arc with Chrysanthemum was too quick.
Yeah, it very was.
I needed a couple more scenes to sort of process this idea. One of the things, Nick, that I sort of lost a little bit of patience with the show. And I didn't really discover this until episode 5, when Mando shows up. And when we arrive in that rain city, I lost my marbles. I was so happy to see a world that I had not seen before.
Oh, okay.
Lost my marbles. I went crazy excited. That's what I mean. Maybe I'm using the wrong American phrase. Okay. Because and then when I saw that, I sort of realized almost everything that we've seen in the show is familiar territory. And it was so exciting to be in a place where I was sort of like, where are we? What is this? Oh my God, it's a ring. Oh my God, it's upside down and right side up, because when you're in space, there's no up and there's no down. Right. My mind just kept going and processing all of this stuff. Very similar to the same way I felt at the very beginning of Mando season 2, when Grogu and Mando come out of the shadows and they go into the city, and there is sort of like the seedy part of the city with graffiti and fight clubs and all of that. Sort of like, whoa. I mean, we've seen cities before, but we haven't seen something like that. And I think one of the things that I found disappointing about the show is that it didn't make the world larger. It didn't show us things we hadn't seen before. Like, it's one of the things that I look for in Star Wars. Like, show me more of the galaxy. Show me things I haven't seen. And so much of the show was familiar territory. This is why BD was so exciting.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I did right. What is this? And I know it comes from a video game and all of that. And there's a nostalgic element for people that started playing with this 3 years ago. But it was something new. It was something new. And so I missed that. The Ring City was for me a little orgasm. That thing showed up, and I was in another planet. Literally. Literally.
I feel like there's I know also they've talked about how these shows are all supposed to kind of interconnect or build up to something much larger. Book of Boba Fett, Mando and Ahsoka, leading to something we don't quite know what it is yet. But my theory
is that true? Is that true?
That is what Favreau and Filoni have said.
Okay.
So I don't, like I said, they haven't really talked about what it's leading to, but I guess we'll see. But the way you mentioned that little ring city, I think we're going to see it again. That's just my feeling. I feel like that's a cool concept.
It's amazing.
The armor is there, so we may go back to there, see where she's up to. There were all these scenes like when Mando is going down the ladder and space is under him, and that's cool.
My brain couldn't process fast enough. It was just magnificent.
I think
magnificent.
I do agree with you that the series as a whole kind of doesn't give us much new, as in like seeing things and visuals. I think it does a couple of cool things though with lore building. We learned more, like I said, about the Tuscans, even about kind of the history of Mandalorian. We learned
that flashback is awesome. The Night of the Thousand Tears.
Right. And I think little things like that. And we even learned we kind of set things up for Luke and Grogu and kind of where the Jedi, I guess, as a whole are. I kind of enjoyed the little things like that about it.
I enjoyed it, but you know, there was something, I think it was in the nostalgia episode, you said something that has sort of stayed with me. Nostalgia, in a way, sort of limits the new possibilities of storytelling. And it felt, and I felt this in The Mandalorian too, but I really felt it in here, where it was a show of filling in the blanks, which is interesting. Like the Night of the Thousand Tears is mentioned before, and now we get to see it, and we get to sort of see how it fits in the whole story of Mandalore and the Mandalorians. But there's only so much filling the blanks that I want. Yeah, sure. I want to know more about new things. I want to know where these stories are going. I don't mind bringing back characters, but those characters need to sort of have a function beyond, oh my God, it's blank. Oh my God, it's blank. Oh my God, it's blank. Yeah. And that's fun. I'm not saying that's not fun, but there has to be more than that for me.
I agree.
I'm picky.
I agree.
I'm picky. I just want more.
That's why I think I think, not that I want to discredit anybody that does this, but I think that's why you and I talked about, we didn't want to do an episode on a podcast episode on each episode of the Book of Boba Fett, because that's where you get into, to me, it's just a small chapter of a larger story, and you and I both agree you kind of need to put it all in context before we, just, I guess, run our mouths.
One of the reasons why I love enjoying, this is why I love doing the podcast with you, is that I like talking sort of about larger Star Wars, not about this micro thing, that micro thing. I really like sort of putting all of these elements, formats, genres, stories, characters together. And so talking about the whole season was a fun idea, but I didn't want to micromanage Star Wars. There are enough podcasts that do that, and they do it really, really well. You want to know every single reference, go to New Rockstars, go to other places, Star Wars Explained. There are people who are doing this really, really well. I am much more interested in making connections, and this is why I love doing this show with you.
Yeah. Something else I wanted to talk about right before we wrap up, Carmelo, is and we did a whole episode on her and Ahsoka, her inclusion of the show. Which if you would have, I wouldn't have put money on it because I wouldn't have expected her to show up, or Luke for that matter. But I think I know this is kind of a little off topic, but it happened in the Book of Boba Fett, so I kind of think we should mention it. The whole inclusion of her and Luke and seeing Grogu train that whole kind of that side of the Jedi, which I thought this show would be strictly underworld bounty hunting.
Yep.
Maybe even a little bit of Mandalorian history, but no, there was almost a whole episode dedicated to Jedi and kind of what they're, where they're heading and kind of where they're taking Luke, and even some history between Ahsoka and Luke. It looks like obviously they've met before.
They've met before, right?
We don't know when, but
right.
They've met before. Obviously,
right.
They're familiar with each other. I just thought that as a person who, both of us who really love Ahsoka, who love Luke, that whole little sequence, that episode was really satisfying. It was fun.
There's a what I think is a really important line in that episode when Luke says, I don't think I'm teaching him things as much as he's remembering things. And it feels to me that whole section is for us to sort of know that Grogu, as he rejoins with Mando, and we move on to the next season of Mandalorian, that there's going to be there are lots of skills that Grogu has with him that he doesn't need the training because he's had the training. He's 50 years old. He might not be able to speak, but he's been around for a while.
Right.
That he's going to be able to do lots of things that we haven't seen without him having to be trained by a Jedi.
Right.
Because at the end of episode 6, when he has to decide between the lightsaber and the Mando mail, what I call, I knew it was going to be the Mando mail because there's the Mandalorian season 3, and we can't have a whole CGI television show on Luke Skywalker. We just can't do that. He can show up here and there, and so it's really interesting. I really love how they set up the future of Grogu in that sequence as someone who knows more than he remembers and is capable of doing more than he can right now. That I found really interesting. And the other thing that you mentioned, Luke and Ahsoka have met before. I think that's going to come in the Ahsoka show later on.
That would be fun. I would love to see
because
that.
It'll be really interesting. It'll be really interesting to have Ahsoka knowing Luke Skywalker. And Ezra's going to show up, who is another Force-trained person who is not officially a Jedi. And so I'm really looking forward to this. I'm going to die. I'm just going to pee my pants when that show starts.
Me too. Probably one of the most anticipated shows, I think, out of Star Wars that I'm looking forward to. I think the interesting part, though, is, and we plan on doing eventually, we don't know when, an episode on Luke, a character study of sorts. But I think it's fun how this episode just subtly set up where we know he's going to end up in the sequels. We see small hints of that. I think that's really awesome detail. Pay attention to detail, and it's very fun. I like those connections, and even I don't know if I would call it a conflict, but the difference of opinion between Ahsoka and Luke, where Mando asked, he said, you didn't want to train the child. She said, I didn't, but no, that's Luke's decision.
Right.
Even though it sounds like they have a disagreement. I don't know if we'll ever see that disagreement, but I just enjoyed that small, subtle tension, I guess you could call it. And just seeing the Luke kind of, even at the end of Mando season 2, I didn't love it because I wanted Luke and kind of I wanted something different from Star Wars that we talked about before. Not a whole, this person's here, this person's showing up, yay. I've enjoyed the subtle character growth that we're going to see from Luke because he even says, I don't know what I'm doing. exactly. He's unsure of himself.
Right.
And we see him making kind of similar mistakes as the Jedi before him.
Yep.
Obi-Wan and Yoda. And
Right.
at this point, it gives him a little more character, because at the end of season 2 of Mando, I felt he was just a action figure in a lot of ways. I mean, he didn't really give us much. And I know it was kind of,
it was a cameo appearance.
It was, it wasn't supposed to be a, big, it's just a big fun reveal. And, I kind of enjoyed this take with Luke. I was not expecting them to kind of dive into a little bit of his character. And so I've enjoyed that. And, like we said all episode, I was surprised it was in the Book of Boba Fett. So
yeah.
That really blew my mind.
I think what you said about Mando 2.5 makes a lot of sense.
It does.
But I didn't, because I'm dumb. I just didn't know that was the thing. And I came in here sort of like, oh, interesting. It's going to be a show about bounty hunters.
Yeah.
But it really wasn't. It really wasn't. So,
like I said earlier, they're building towards, from what we know, something bigger. So I'm sure in a few years, whenever it wraps up, or we kind of know what's going on, I'm sure this will make more sense in the grand scheme of the larger story. Right now,
I'm a little more cynic than you are.
Maybe that's what I'm hoping anyway. That's my hope. But I like I said, I like to kind of not take things out of context. Just give us.
We shall wait. We shall wait. We'll still be alive. I don't have any fatal diseases, so we'll be able to see where we're going on. So I just wanted to remind everybody that if you like our video, make sure you like it, and to make sure that you get notifications for the show, subscribe to our channel. So when we upload our next episode, you know that it's there for you to watch and spread the word. Thank you so much, Nick. Thank you so much, audience. May the force be with everybody, and we'll see you at the next one.